Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 735. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about catfish and caimans, jungles and tuk-tuks, monkeys and piranha, as we take the slow boat on the Amazon in Peru and Colombia.
Maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Let's talk about the Amazon. I'd like to welcome to the show Will Conway from the Baggage Claim podcast at heybaggageclaim.com, who's come to talk to us about the Northwest Amazon. Will, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chris, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Where are we talking about specifically? Let's put it on a map here.
For sure. So we're talking about a very specific stretch of the Amazon rainforest, really the Amazon River, that takes us from Leticia, which is the southeasternmost city in Colombia, all the way down the river and into Peru to Iquitos, which is a fairly large, sprawling metropolis in the middle of the Amazon rainforest in northeastern Peru.
Excellent. And why should someone go to this part of the world? Why should someone go to the Amazon?
Yeah, I think one of the things I really want to talk about and advocate for in this conversation is that I think the Amazon is a lot more accessible than people think. Now, if you're listening to this and you're into things like Disneyland and cruises, I can't imagine that this would necessarily be the right fit, as fun as those things can be. But if you're considering a trip to something like Thailand or Switzerland, the Amazon has come with this, I think, this stigma, this imposing, almost intimidating quality.
That if I go to the Amazon, I may die? You mean that thing?
Yeah, that thing, the piranhas and the snakes and the mosquitoes.
Teddy Roosevelt and the River of Death, that kind of thing, yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. I think it just ends up getting skipped. I know I came in with a certain level of fear, and I ended up finding the Amazon a lot more accessible. The people are incredibly warm. and courteous and helpful. And on a whole, it took about a day or two to ease into it. But once I did, I ended up backpacking for about 8 months, and this was about 2 weeks of my trip. It was the most incredible set of memories that I have from my entire trip.
Excellent. Well, tell us more about the itinerary you have in mind for us. Where are we going to start?
Yeah, so we're going to start in Leticia, which, if you think about Colombia as a country, you might in your head kind of have a trapezoid, a big block, comes from Panama over to Brazil and down to Peru and Ecuador. If you, you really have to zoom in down on a map, there's actually this sort of, it would be a peninsula, except that it's entirely landlocked, down in the southeast corner that stretches all the way down to the Amazon River. And that's where Leticia is. So Leticia is a small city. It's like 40, 50,000 people. And it really stands as like an outpost on the edge of the Amazon rainforest. At first, Leticia is going to feel like any traditional small town in Colombia. If you've spent much time in Colombia, it'll feel similar to that. But for context, a really warm and inviting, but simultaneously this edgy atmosphere, which will feel similar. But then all of a sudden these elements creep in. You just get this sense that this isn't traditional Colombia or traditional South America. I'm sort of in this alternative world.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll give you an example of that. There's a park in downtown Leticia. It's called Parque Santander. And Parque Santander, for 22 hours out of the day, looks like any other park in South America. It's kind of got the Plaza de Armas feel with a beautiful fountain in the middle, a Catholic church off to the side, street vendors and men smoking cigars on park benches. And then at about 4 o'clock in the evening, you hear this faraway screeching sound. And within about 5 minutes, the sky is entirely black. And there are 30,000, they're called monk-winged parakeets, that are screeching and swooping so low that you have to duck because they're weaving in and out. This happens for about 2 hours every night, and then they sort of go to sleep and it chills off. But the whole city just gets overcome by this sensation, specifically this one park.
Interesting. Well, and you were talking about Leticia and where it is, just so people can put it on a map. We're talking about a little panhandle of Colombia, and that right where Leticia is basically is where Brazil and Colombia and Peru all meet.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You can actually walk into Brazil from Leticia.
Okay.
And all of a sudden you just cross the line. Depending on the time of the year, your watch is going to have to go back 1 or 2 hours because you've crossed over officially into Brazil. And then there is this little boat on the Amazon River that houses one lady who is working for the Colombian government. She's the exit from Colombia. And then you walk right next door and there's another lady sitting there, and she stamps you into Peru. I'm sorry, and all of a sudden you transition to Peru.
Got it. What else are we going to do while we're in Leticia before we get on the river here?
I would highly recommend. Leticia itself is going to be sort of limited in what you can do, but there are a few things that you can absolutely start in Leticia. One of them is I would recommend, I've, by the way, no relationship financially with the person I'm about to say. So I want to name that going forward because I had a wonderful experience at this hostel. It's called Casa de Espuelas. And honestly, I had to Google that before we had a conversation today, Chris, because in my head, it's just Louisa's hostel.
Okay. And the best ones are, right? The best ones are associated with the person who runs it. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, just this unbelievably warm and inviting person. She's been running this hostel for decades, and she's in her mid to late 60s. Just the sweetest person. In my brain, I'm pretty confident that she actually runs all of Leticia. She seems to know everybody. She's kind of built this little like matriarchy. She's unbelievable. But she actually helped me and a close friend of mine organize a tour down the river. So there are basically two ways to operate down the river towards Iquitos. One is the fast boat and one is the slow boat.
Okay.
The fast boat is going to be a bumpy 12-hour ride on a speedboat.
Oh, so it's a jet boat. Okay.
Yeah, it's a jet boat.
Okay.
It's going to take you quickly down the Amazon, and it stops off once every 2 hours. Now, I haven't taken it the full way to Iquitos, but I was on this boat for 45 minutes to an hour at a time to go to sort of increasingly distant and remote villages down the Amazon River.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, you can end up with different tour guides who are going to take you to do different things. So one of the most unbelievable things that you can do in the Amazon is actually at night, they'll take you out on a small dory and you'll power down the Amazon into these little tributaries and go basically fishing for caimans, which are these, I would say, like 2 foot long
Crocodilians. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And the night I did it, it was just me and my friend Jeff, who was an Irish guy I had met, and this guide that we were with, who was this young guy, who was like 22, 23. The sky was blanketed in these really thick clouds. The moon was poking through. The whole world kind of had this silver tint. And we were shining flashlights, and every once in a while you'd catch these red eyes of a crocodile, 2 foot long, less intimidating crocodile. You slowly approach, and then we were terrible at it. So inevitably they'd just submerge and swim away long before we ever got to them. But that was kind of a blast.
And you say fishing for caimans, so you're not using a rod and reel?
No. It's a net-based
Got
setup.
it.
And
Okay.
then if you are incredibly adventurous and aggressive guide, you're going with your bare hands. But I had no stomach for that.
Maybe you're going with your bare hands.
Yeah. Your guide can go for his bare hands and your best friend can. I wouldn't recommend it for yourself.
Got it.
Yeah, so that was unbelievable. One thing you do with a rod and reel, with a bamboo rod, which is kind of fascinating, and basically a little bit of twine at the end, is you go fishing for piranhas, which is pretty wild.
Okay.
And if you think about the classic thing about piranhas of them responding to motion, this is entirely true. If you're used to normal fishing where you kind of let it sit and you want the rod and reel you essentially want to trick the fish into believing you're not there. With piranhas, it's the opposite. You bang the bamboo against the surface of the water and try to attract them, and they just come swarming in. It's pretty wild. Yeah.
Okay.
And by the way, one of the easiest things you can do, because there are quite a few of them.
Got it.
Yeah.
Going back to the fear that Amazon could kill me. Yes.
Yeah, maybe I shouldn't have led with
That's
stories
okay.
about some piranhas.
So anything else before we get on the boat here? You're taking the slow boat.
Yeah. So we took the slow boat. If we're talking about a listener right now who has 10 days or 7 days or 2 weeks, the slow boat's going to take you 4 or 5. So the fast boat might be your decision here.
Okay.
But I had a wonderful experience on this slow boat. I think there's something to be said for sinking into sort of this experience of having nothing to do except watch the world's most powerful river float by, because that was an unbelievable experience.
Now, if I quickly Google river trips on the Amazon, I'm going to find something where I've got this luxurious cabin and it's going to be $500 a night, and there's going to be probably a steward for my cabin and gourmet meals. We're not talking about that, right? We're talking about something that's more of a backpacker budget.
I'm sure somebody could tell you a story about a luxury liner down the Amazon. I am not that person, Chris.
Okay, that's fine. So what are we talking about? If you had to describe the boat, so where are you sleeping, first of all? You don't have the luxury cabin.
Nope. I wouldn't say there's a single cabin in this boat. So
Okay.
The way this ship is set up, if you think about a reasonably sized ferry boat that's going to be 3 stories tall, it's a big white ferry. The ground floor is transporting goods basically between Leticia and Iquitos. So that floor, there are big crates of fruit. There was some livestock on ours, as well as just other supplies and things like that. And the 2 floors above that, when you enter the boat, are completely hollow. They're just totally empty, big, open, cavernous floors. And then you have to buy a hammock in advance. You string up the hammock, and that ends up being your sort of home base. So me and My friend Jeff hung up our hammocks, and there we lived for 4 days on this rusty old ferry boat that taxied us down the river. It's pretty wild.
And you say you have to buy a hammock. If I had my own hammock, would I just be buying the spot?
Yeah, so you're essentially paying for the spot on the boat. Now
Yep.
we're not talking about a lot of money here. We're talking about what was the number? It was, I believe, 80,000 Colombian pesos, which is going to translate to about $20, $25 US
For how many days?
for for 4 to 5 days, meals
So
included.
pretty much exactly the same as what we were talking about at the $500 a day.
Yeah, pretty much the exact same experience.
And so that's going to buy me a place to string my hammock, and then meals are on top of that?
Meals are included. The meals
It's
are.
included.
I wouldn't consider the meals to be phenomenal. They're
Okay.
better than I was expecting, though. There's also a little snack bar where you can get like cheeseburgers and things like that on the boat. They have a bar set up there too.
Okay.
It's a little bit of a community feel. There's music playing. There's all sorts of interesting people, most of whom are blue collar working class folks from
Mhm.
Peru, Colombia, or Brazil who are basically commuting to one or the other city between Leticia and Iquitos.
And then we talk about meals. Some rice and beans and something else, I'm guessing.
Yeah. So if you're familiar with Colombia, there's a staple dish in central Colombia that's going to be, it's called bandejo paisa. When you get to the Amazon, it's essentially the same meal. Bandejo paisa is essentially just going to be rice and beans and either chicken or beef, depending on the
Okay.
situation.
Yep, that's what I expected.
Here on the Amazon, you're going to sub that out for fish.
For
though.
fish, sure. Okay.
Yeah. There are a lot of amazing things about the Amazon. The food is not one of them.
Not on this particular
I wouldn't go
way.
for
Okay.
the cuisine.
Okay.
So yeah, you're gonna end up on this boat for days. We had 4 nights and the morning of the fifth day. That experience was at first kind of intense. You end up right, there's nothing to do. It's just you
Mhm.
on this boat.
And they're not there to entertain you and not at those rates. They're there to get for
They're there,
transportation.
they
Yeah.
transport you from A to B, and that's really the priority.
Okay.
The experience ends up becoming incredible. I found it to be incredibly like meditative and cathartic in a sort of beautiful sense. You can sit on the bow of this ship, and the boat is moving so slowly that if you were walking on the shore next to the boat, you'd be moving at about the same pace. So it's crawling up the Amazon.
Well, and you were going upstream.
Yes. Coming the other direction, my understanding is the trip is actually 1 day shorter. I
Sure.
haven't done it that way, but that's
Makes
what I've
sense.
heard because of the current. So you're on this boat, you just watch the world go by, and you're on this incredibly wide, thick, muddy river, and you end up seeing some wild things if you sit at the bow of this boat for long enough. At one point, it took me probably 20 minutes to identify what I was looking at. There was something swimming next to the boat
Hmm.
that was, at first, I thought like a bear. Like size wise, I thought
Okay.
something of that magnitude. About 15, 20 minutes later, somebody else came out, and I speak very little Spanish, but I was like, ¿Qué es eso? And basically, he said it was a catfish.
Oh, okay.
Enormous catfish the size of a Prius or a smart car. It was
Oh, wow.
huge.
Okay.
Yeah, we're talking about a big animal. But then you're just going to watch these beautiful herons swoop and little villages go by, people motoring down with dories. It's a very peaceful, very cathartic experience.
And is the boat is going to stop along the way and pick up and drop off people at different stops?
Yes, but very infrequently, maybe once a day.
Okay. And does it then cruise at night, or does it stay in port? Or
No, we're cruising at night, so you're making progress all night long. The thing that's interesting about the night is it often rains in the Amazon. It's a rainforest.
Right.
So that
Sure.
checks out. So me and my Irish friend Jeff sat on the bow of the ship one night. Light drizzle was coming down, and you can see at the tree line, then it just goes flat for miles and miles and miles. We're watching this just intense fork lightning come down in every direction, but it was dead silent. You didn't actually hear the lightning. it was just this incredibly beautiful experience.
So now you mentioned going out and fishing for caimans one night. Was that off the boat or was that before you got on the boat?
That was prior to it. So we
Okay,
essentially did Leticia, and from Leticia through Casa de Espuelas and Luisa, did this 3-day tour down the Amazon to what essentially amounted to increasingly remote villages of 50 or 100 people. And it was during the course of that we did the fishing for both caiman and
Got it. Okay.
piranhas. Yeah.
And we say down, we're doing downriver, which in this case is to our east.
Yeah. So we're talking exactly. So we're talking about a very odd stretch of the river where it does a kind of curve. So
Right.
I'm using downriver and upriver probably in the wrong direction here, but I'm thinking about it in terms of which way we were powering. In this case, we were powering towards Iquitos. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Upriver. Okay.
Yeah. My bad.
Got it.
Ah, bon chien. Bonjour, je suis Theo, a tour leader with Explore. And this is Punti. He's helping us find truffles under the trees next to this beautiful vineyard. Maybe for tomorrow's cooking class? Oui, call c'est million heure. Parfait. C'est million o'clock. Not everyone gets to enjoy a Bordeaux sunset this way, but you will if you explore. No, Punti. Search exploreworldwide.com and don't just travel. Explore.
To realize the future America needs, we understand what's needed from us. To face each threat head on. We've earned our place in the fight for our nation's future. We are Marines. We were made for this.
And so for this part of the trip, we want to bring a good book and a pair of binoculars. What else should I bring with me to get the most out of this part of the trip?
You should bring a good book and a pair of binoculars. There isn't a lot else. I would make sure your iPhone is fully charged and downloaded with every podcast, every episode of Amateur Traveler you can get your hands on.
Well, one should always have that. So
Exactly.
So this is when an external power brick might be useful too, because you're not having a place to plug in your gear, is what it sounds like.
No, the guy who runs the snack bar there has, on the boat we were on, he had one functioning power block, and he would let you plug it in for an hour at a time for, I think it was like 2,000 Colombian pesos, which is like 50 cents.
Got it.
Yeah, you're going to want a power block. I didn't have it. My phone died before the first night, so I was just reading.
Got it.
And then you end up, so this is bizarre too, right? There's this psychological thing that happens when you enter the Amazon, which is that you start in Leticia. And if you've just flown in from the US, say you just flew out of Phoenix or New York or San Jose, you've just come from this large metropolis. At first, Leticia is going to feel like this outpost, like almost a very large campsite with motorbikes. But then you go down the river and you end up in these tiny little villages. And to those folks, and to you after 2 days, Leticia becomes the big city. So the entire world transforms, and your relative understanding of scale becomes entirely different. In these little villages, nature is the dominating factor, and people are just working around it. But then you take the boat into Iquitos, it's a sprawling metropolis of 500,000 people. So for context, Atlanta's like 410,000, I think. So this is a huge city, and it has an incredibly odd distinction of being the largest city in the world that is inaccessible by road. So you have to either fly into Iquitos or you have to boat in the way we did. You can't get there by car, but I think about it like, could you imagine if you couldn't drive into Atlanta? That seems wild. Yeah.
Interesting.
Then you end up in Iquitos, which is an absolutely wonderful, wonderful city. It has a similar energy to a lot of cities in South America with two twists. One is the twist I applied to Leticia, which is sort of this understanding of the Amazon surrounding it in a very serious sense. And the other is this twist of mysticism or spirituality, which I want to identify for your listeners. Iquitos is the capital. It sort of comes from this long tradition of pre-colonial indigenous people in South America
Mm-hmm.
who had leaned spiritually into ayahuasca, which is this psychedelic. They won't call it a drug. So if you call it a drug there, you'll get a stern look and talking to. They call it medicine. And there are shamans and they guide these retreats. It's a deeply Catholic city, but
Mm-hmm.
that Catholicism is twisted and interconnected with this mysticism that's tied deeply into the surrounding nature and this ritualistic psychedelic experience that folks from that part of the world often partake in.
Okay.
I would highly recommend Iquitos as a jumping off point for a sort of visit to the natural world. In terms of things to do in Iquitos,
Mm-hmm.
the city is really going to be a launch pad similar to Leticia. So one of the beautiful things that you can do there is you can go to these incredible animal reservations
Mm-hmm.
where they essentially rehabilitate wildlife that's in bad shape for some reason or another. But you'll end up, first of all, learning a ton, but also playing with some adorable monkeys. There was one that actually was so attached to my head that it refused at the exit. There's a guy guarding the exit. He was like, you can't take the monkey with you, right? And I was like, I know that. I think you have to tell the monkey, though, because he was so. When the guard tried to take him off, he actually wrapped his tail around my neck, and their tails are powerful. All of a sudden, I was like, this monkey is like choking me.
And this is Monkey Island. Am I in the right place?
Yeah, actually, this is Monkey Island.
La Isla de los Monos.
Isla de los Monos, that's correct. There are a couple others that I've also heard phenomenal things about. One of them is Amazon Rescue Center, which is just outside of Iquitos.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go back in the direction of Leticia, this is an indigenous word I'm going to pronounce terribly, but I believe the pronunciation is Maicuchiga, monkey sanctuary, and that's outside of Leticia.
Okay. Yeah, once you get into indigenous languages, I can be of no help to you at all in terms of pronunciation.
Yeah, I was hoping for a lifeline, but not expecting one.
Nope.
I would say that the general thrust of the trip is you have these two cities that are incredibly different,
Mm-hmm.
and they're separated by essentially, I think it's like 220, 230 miles of river. And you just recognize, again, big city in the US or Europe or somewhere else, your sensation is going to be that we people sort of figured out this whole nature thing and we conquered that battle and we're moving on to other things. You go to these places and you recognize there's just a sense of your own smallness. And when combined with some of the mysticism and spirituality imbued in the culture, especially in Iquitos, it's very difficult not to internalize some of those sensations, not to get like too metaphysical. But one of the big things to come out of the Amazon for me was just this sense of smallness, that sort of standing on a beach and looking out. It was absolutely one of the more beautiful experiences that I can recommend.
Now, one question for the Amazon part of it, the river cruises. I think about when we talk to people, for instance, who have done the Trans-Siberian Railroad, they talk about the first hour you're looking at it and going, wow, look at all the trees. And then you see trees for a week. And that there is a somewhat of a sameness to the experience. I'm assuming with this, you're going to have moments of wildlife spotting and then a lot of trees. Am I on the right track?
You are exactly right.
Okay.
There's a level of boredom that comes along with the slow boat that I'm definitely underselling. That exists for sure.
And I'm not trying to say boredom is a bad thing in this case. For some people, that might be a great way to take a break, right? Bring a good book or bring a good book that happens to be a book about birds or wildlife or something like that and enjoy slowing down and certainly disconnecting. Even if you have the cell phone charged, you're not going to be finding a signal, I'm guessing.
That's all of that is absolutely true. And the other element of it is that you're surrounded by people who, if you were to just go to Lima or go to a big city, you're not going to meet quite the same type of people that, you know, in a big city like Lima or Cusco, where you're sort of oriented around tourism.
Sure.
You're meeting tour guides and you're meeting waiters at restaurants and you're meeting various people like that. When you're on this boat, you're meeting whoever is coincidentally on this boat at that time. And it turns out that those people are wonderful and crazy. I played poker with 10 Peruvian soles with these two guys on this boat for about 6 hours straight one day. And we just laughed and had a great time. You end up, and I have no Spanish whatsoever, by the way. It's just entirely a relationship built around eyes and whatever language you can cobble together. So it's kind of cool. But there's some beauty in that too, I think.
Well, and one question would be, it seemed like maybe on a boat like this that having more Spanish would open you up to more interaction just because you have some time.
Oh, that's undoubtedly true.
Okay.
I wish that I took Spanish more seriously in high school, especially on this boat.
I completely relate to that. I had to learn Spanish as an adult because I wasn't smart enough to learn it as a kid. I didn't think Spanish, to be honest, I didn't think Spanish would take me anywhere because I grew up in an agricultural region where Spanish was the language of the fields. And the younger version of me said, why do I want to learn Spanish? And guess what language I've had to learn? I've had to use more often than any other foreign language that I've learned is Spanish. So I'd love to tell the younger me to study his Spanish, but
if there are any young folks in high school listening to this, there are a couple subjects you can ignore in school. I wouldn't recommend language to be one of the ones you ignore because you'll end up like me on a weird boat in the middle of the Amazon and not be able to talk to anybody. And it's a little weird and unfortunate. So take your Spanish seriously.
por supuesto. Excellent.
Exactly.
Anything else we want to talk about in terms of the overall itinerary, first of all, or things that people should know to do or not to do while they're on this trip?
There was one experience, Chris, that was a little bit silly. I'm going to forget the name of it. But in Iquitos, there's this area right on the river that is this interlocking web of lagoons.
Okay.
If you think about Venice, they actually call it Venice. So it's buildings on either side and these lagoons. There's a tour that goes through those lagoons. You can do it if you want. I didn't have a terrible experience with it. I would recommend just walking down to those and exploring these really intricate and interesting, this web of city built into the river, because it's fascinating.
Got it. And it sounds like that may be and I'm looking at this, trying to know how to pronounce it, the Quistococha lagoon area. Okay.
That's the one. So I would highly recommend taking a walk through that area. But they have tour boats that take you through Venice style with a guy on the back sort of thing.
Does he sing like Venice?
He does not sing.
Well, I'd pay extra for that.
I wouldn't actually recommend that boat. It's something about it just felt a little gimmicky. It had no real tie into the actual culture of the city. It was just a thing that they were doing to make a few bucks on tourists. So that might be something to stay away from. But I would highly recommend going down to those lagoons because that was phenomenal.
Got it. Anything we talked about bringing a book and bringing maybe an extra battery for your cell phone. Anything else you should pack for this trip?
You're not going to be able to pack it. I don't think you could. Well, maybe in your checked luggage, but you're going to want more mosquito spray than you bought. However much mosquito spray, Chris, you've bought in your life to this point, buy all of that again and bring it to Leticia because it's going to be a lot.
I don't suppose I get a mosquito netting above my hammock?
So on the boat, actually, because you're moving, even though it doesn't feel like there's wind, the mosquitoes are not able to stay in one place. And the mosquitoes on the boat, very fortunately, are not a serious problem.
Interesting.
But yes, every other place you're going to be under a mosquito net.
You're in a rainforest.
We're very, very much in a rainforest.
You're standing in the prettiest spot you saw. Where are you standing? What are you looking at?
You know where I'm standing? I am on the slow boat coming into Iquitos at the edge of the Amazon. So behind you from where we just came, there are miles and miles and miles as far as the eye can see of just beautiful green lush trees. And then you look ahead where the boat is going and the port of Iquitos is actually incredibly colorful. These beautiful pastel houses and buildings. For some reason, the ferry boats and the barges and everything in the port is very flamboyantly colored. So you're going to get these green and orange tugboats and these really deep, bright red boats. There's something about the just monotony of the Amazon rainforest and then this rainbow of color as you come into the city. So that would be my pick.
Excellent. One thing that makes you laugh and say only in the Peruvian Amazon?
So one thing that's interesting about Iquitos is because it's inaccessible by road, there are no cars. The way around is going to be what are essentially rickshaws, but they're basically big motor tricycles with a two-person seat on the back.
Yeah, I would call them tuk-tuks after my time in Southeast Asia, but that same sort of motorcycle rickshaw.
Very similar to a tuk-tuk, essentially. So only in Iquitos is your only option for transportation, a tuk-tuk.
And if you had to summarize this trip in just 3 words, what 3 words are you going to use?
Unbelievably life-changing.
Excellent. Excellent. And again, our guest has been Will Conway from the Baggage Claim podcast, heybaggageclaim.com. And Will, I know you haven't been doing the podcast for very long. Do you have resources for us if we were going to send people to your best resources for this trip?
I do. I actually have something a little funky for your listeners today, Chris, which is if folks want more information specifically about the Amazon, I've set up a resource page on my website. What they can do is they can actually text the word Amazon to 332-877-9540. My website's heybaggageclaim.com. The podcast is this intensely immersive first-person 5-sensory experience of being in different places. So the tagline is travel stories no one tells, and they're very short, 10, 15, 20 minutes at the upper end, immersive firsthand experiences of being in different places.
Excellent. And I'm curious how you do the smell-o-vision part of that when you say 5 senses. That's the hardest part to do with the podcast. And if I do text to that number, I'm not going to get a timeshare, right?
No. So there's no spam. You're going to get a link to this page on my website that's going to have a lot of the information we covered today. And every once in a while, I might share with you that I have a podcast, but you're not going to get spam.
Excellent. Will, thank you so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for this part of the Amazon.
Thank you so much, Chris. It was a pleasure being here.
In news of the community, first, again, another thanks goes out to my patrons of the show who support this show through patreon.com/amateurtraveler. Thanks so much. Speaking of patrons on the show that we did recently on the coast of Virginia, Jeff Olfs, patron of the show and National Park Ranger Emeritus, wrote and said, "So you were one of those kids the Rangers so love. Thanks for the kind words for our Rangers. Fun fact, Yorktown Victory Monument is the oldest congressionally authorized area in the national park system. October 29th, 1781. Therefore, it can be claimed that the currently named Colonial National Historic Park is technically the oldest continuous protected area in the National Park Service." Very cool. Did not know that, Jeff. Need to add one national park area, Fort Monroe National Monument. Other national park administered entities in the area include the Captain John Smith Chesapeake National Historic Trail, Washington Rochambeau Revolutionary Route National Historic Trail, and the Chesapeake Bay Gateways or Network. Finally, one often overlooked area of Colonial National Historic Park is the Cape Henry Memorial next to Virginia Beach. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks so much. Catching up on some of the Apple Podcast reviews from the summer, we got some very simple ones from Wakutushi said, "Great pod." Sam2423 said, "I love the variety of places covered on the podcast. Chris brings on many fascinating guests and adds insightful commentary that immerses you in the cultures and places around the world. I listen to this podcast every day in the car and even on my runs around the neighborhood. Thankfully, there's years of podcasts to go through. But Sam, you are catching up because I am not making one a day." Lisa 420420 says, "Thank you. Love this podcast." And then Marshall says, "I love this podcast and listen to every episode. Chris does a terrific job of scheduling such a diverse range of places and people that make these various locations come to life. During the pandemic, when we can't travel, and those who are from the USA are understandably not welcome in most countries, listening to these weekly podcasts keeps the dream alive and scratches that chronic itch to see the world. Listen, learn, and support this podcast. Big thanks to Chris for his decade and a half of service to us. Thanks so much, Marshall. That really warms my heart. Sorry I didn't get to those reviews until now. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate them. One reminder, if you want to support the show, you can go to amateurtraveler.com/affiliates, and there are a number of different affiliate links you can use when you're buying things, mostly for travel, but you can also go to places like amateurtraveler.com/Amazon and just buy through Amateur Traveler and send us a little something, and you pay no more. And it helps support the show. And with that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more cafe.